He abandoned her after she gave birth and mocked her in court, but she exposed everything. The courtroom was suffocating. Not from lack of oxygen, but from the weight of judgment, silence, and gazes that sliced deeper than any words could. A woman stood alone at the plaintiff's bench, clutching a worn leather bag as if it were her only source of strength. On the other side sat a man in an expensive gray suit, legs crossed with confidence, fingers drumming the polished wood. His smirk was visible even from across the room, and his attorney, slick and arrogant, whispered to him as they exchanged glances like victorious generals awaiting a hollow conquest. The judge cleared her throat, prepared to deliver a verdict that would change a life, or maybe ruin it. The room was still, except for the creak of the woman's shoes as she stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, almost breaking. "Your Honor, before you decide, I have something to add." Whispers echoed across the gallery. Even the court reporter paused, pen hovering midair. The woman reached into her bag, pulling out a document sealed in a folder that had clearly been opened and closed dozens of times. Her hands shook, but her eyes had a strange steadiness, as if something had shifted inside her just moments before. The judge raised an eyebrow, motioning for the clerk to retrieve it. Her ex-partner's smirk faded just a touch, his brow twitching ever so slightly as he leaned forward. The judge reviewed the document silently, the seconds dragging into minutes. Then came a long breath from the bench, a pause that felt like a cliffhanger suspended in real life. Just a few minutes earlier, no one in that courtroom had doubted the outcome. The woman, young and exhausted, had been painted as a gold digger by the defense, lazy, manipulative, and unworthy of child support. She hadn't even hired a lawyer. She came to represent herself, unpolished, without makeup, and wearing a faded blouse with a button missing near the sleeve. Every detail had been used against her, including her job as a part-time cleaner and single mother of a 2-year-old. The judge had shown restraint, but there was a visible skepticism in her tone. The ex had denied paternity, accused her of emotional instability, and even suggested that the child wasn't his at all. The woman had endured it all silently, until now. The woman's posture shifted subtly, spine straighter, shoulders squarer. Something had changed. No one knew what was in the folder yet, but it had brought a tremor into the previously confident voice of the opposing counsel. The room had flipped from mockery to curiosity. Outside the courtroom's walls, the sky turned a dull gray. A storm was coming, but not one of thunder or lightning. It would be made of truth, and it would strike with unexpected force. 2 years earlier, the world had seemed full of hope. The man who now sat across from her in court had once held her hand with tenderness and whispered about the future like it was theirs to build. Back then, he wasn't yet the man in the tailored suit, dripping with contempt. He was just someone she believed in, someone who made her laugh on bad days, someone who promised he'd always be there. They'd met during a volunteer event at a local shelter. She was organizing children's activities, and he was leading a workshop on job readiness for veterans. His charm was effortless. He had a way of making people feel seen, and she hadn't felt truly seen in a long time. The relationship progressed quickly. In just a few months, they were sharing an apartment. She was cautious, life had taught her not to be reckless with her heart, but he made everything seem safe. He said all the right things and offered all the right reassurances. When she became pregnant, he was shocked at first, then thrilled. At least, that's what he said. He touched her stomach and talked about painting a nursery. They argued sometimes about bills, about how she was too emotional, but he always apologized with kisses and promises. She had believed him even when her intuition whispered otherwise. Their son was born on a stormy night in October. He wasn't there. He said he had been stuck at work. She tried not to be upset. She convinced herself that things would get better, that stress was temporary. But the next morning, she found an empty closet where his clothes had been and a single envelope on the table. No goodbye. Just a note, "I'm not ready. I can't do this." That was it. No signature. No forwarding address. Just absence. In hindsight, the signs were all there. The little inconsistencies in his stories. The credit card bills with strange charges. The nights he claimed to work late but returned home smelling like expensive perfume. She'd been so caught up in building a future that she overlooked the cracks forming in the foundation. He was always charming when he needed to be. He had a way of turning every confrontation into a misunderstanding, every suspicion into an overreaction. He accused her of being paranoid, said he felt suffocated, that she needed to trust more. And she did. Because she wanted to believe that what they had was real. There were other red flags too, his refusal to meet her friends, the fact that he never took her to see his family, how he flinched when she mentioned long-term plans. He told her he loved her, but when she mentioned joint bank accounts or life insurance, he would change the subject. She thought it was just immaturity. He was a few years younger, after all. Maybe he needed time. But time only made him colder. By the third trimester, he had all but stopped coming home. Once, she found a receipt for a necklace. It wasn't for her. She asked him about it, and he laughed, saying it was for his sister. She didn't know he had a sister. He said she had passed away years ago and called her insensitive for bringing it up. She apologized. She had cried herself to sleep that night, feeling foolish but unable to shake the feeling that she was being lied to. When she found out she was pregnant, her heart beat with equal parts joy and fear. She had always wanted to be a mother. The idea of creating life, of nurturing someone completely dependent on her, filled her with a kind of sacred awe. But the reality set in quickly. He didn't react the way she had hoped. He stared at the test in silence, his jaw clenched. Then, after what felt like hours, he smiled weakly and said, "Well, I guess we're doing this." But the warmth in his voice was gone. In the weeks that followed, his behavior grew erratic. He alternated between periods of affection and long stretches of detachment. Sometimes he would hold her belly and whisper sweet things to the unborn child. Other times he would vanish for days, returning with vague excuses and an empty gaze. She tried to stay optimistic. She decorated the nursery by herself, choosing colors she hoped would soothe a newborn. She attended appointments alone, telling the nurse each time he wanted to come, but work's been crazy. One night, after another silent dinner, she finally asked him directly, "Do you even want this baby?" He looked up from his plate, emotionless. "Wanting doesn't matter. It's happening." That was all he said. That night, she slept in the nursery, curled up on the rocking chair she had bought secondhand. She didn't cry. She was too tired for tears. But something inside her had shifted. A quiet awareness that she would probably be raising this child on her own, no matter who was physically present. The day he disappeared was quiet, ordinary. She had spent the morning nursing their son, rocking him to sleep by the window where morning light warmed his tiny face. When she stepped into the kitchen, the coffee was still warm in the pot. But the apartment felt different, hollow. The air didn't carry the scent of his cologne, and the silence was too complete. She found his phone charging on the counter, his shoes still by the door, but the coat he always wore was gone. She called his name once, twice, her voice catching. Nothing. Then she saw the note. One line. I'm not ready. I can't do this. She stared at it for several minutes, her mind trying to process what her heart refused to believe. No confrontation. No explanation. No discussion about custody, finances, responsibilities. Just absence. She tried to call, but his number was disconnected. His work said he had resigned. His friends didn't know where he'd gone, or pretended not to. It was as if he had dissolved into thin air. She reported his disappearance, filed papers for abandonment, and waited. But no one came. No help. No child support. Just bills, diapers, and exhaustion. Every night, she nursed her son to sleep with lullabies that shook with fatigue. Every morning, she wiped away the tears before walking him to daycare and heading to her job at a laundromat. The world had moved on. But she hadn't. Not yet. Every morning began the same way, her alarm buzzing in darkness, the distant hum of traffic outside, and the soft whimpers of a child waking to hunger and cold. She would scoop him into her arms, kiss his forehead, and whisper strength into his tiny ears. With every bottle warmed and diaper changed, she told herself, just one more day. It wasn't hope that kept her going, it was survival stitched into instinct. The tiny apartment was poorly heated, and winter crept in through the cracks, numbing her hands as she prepared breakfast from whatever was left. Work was no easier. She juggled 2 part-time jobs, early mornings at a local diner wiping counters and late afternoons cleaning homes. At night, she'd return to find her son asleep on the neighbor's couch, watched over by a retired widow who charged little but worried often. Sometimes, she'd fall asleep in her work clothes, one hand still clutching a bottle or a pacifier. Weekends weren't rest, they were opportunities to catch up on laundry, fight with landlords over late rent, or chase down any extra shifts available. Every task, every motion, was for the tiny life depending on her. One rainy afternoon, as she returned home balancing groceries and her son half asleep in her arms, she found a woman waiting by her front door. Dressed in a pressed blazer and holding a file, the woman introduced herself as a representative from Child Welfare Services. Confused and defensive, the young mother listened as the woman explained that a claim had been filed questioning the paternity and financial responsibility of the child. The name the woman mentioned chilled her blood. It was him. He had re-emerged, not to support, but to discredit. Apparently, he had filed to challenge the obligation of child support, stating uncertainty over whether the child was biologically his. The social worker was polite but formal, her tone carrying the weight of bureaucracy. The mother stared at the floor, feeling the familiar sting of betrayal bloom all over again. She offered to take a DNA test immediately, not because she had anything to prove, but because she refused to let her son be erased. After the woman left, she held her child tighter that night, whispering promises of justice even if she had to stand alone in a room full of doubters. In the weeks that followed, she tried to reach him, not for herself, but for their child. She wrote letters, carefully crafted in simple language that spoke from the heart. She reminded him of their time together, of the nights he once held her belly and spoke to the life inside. She included photos, his son learning to walk, his smile after eating peas for the first time, his sleepy eyes just before bed. She begged, not for love or reconciliation, but for responsibility. He deserves to know his father, one letter read. Another, you don't have to love me. Just show up. None were returned. She later learned he had moved out of state, registered under a new address, and had blocked her from every line of contact. Her letters came back unopened, rubber-stamped with return to sender like cold reminders of her powerlessness. Still, she kept writing. Some nights, she would write a new letter while watching her son sleep, tears dripping onto the paper. She had no idea if the words would ever reach him, but writing them made her feel less invisible. She wasn't giving up. Not yet. When the court summons arrived, she felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. It meant he could no longer hide. The document arrived in a plain envelope, marked with official stamps and long legal jargon. She read it twice, then a third time, to be sure. He was taking her to court, not to accept responsibility, but to escape it. He was contesting paternity and seeking legal exemption from any child support obligations. He claimed she was attempting to trap him financially and emotionally. She sat on the floor with the letter in her hands, her son playing nearby, unaware of the war being waged over his existence. That night, she cried, not because of the injustice, but because of the enormity of what lay ahead. She couldn't afford a lawyer. She couldn't miss work. But she also couldn't allow her son to grow up thinking he had no worth. So she circled the court date, took the day off in advance, and began gathering everything she could: receipts, photos, letters, anything that could become a voice in that courtroom where she would stand alone. The day of the hearing was cold and overcast, a sky full of clouds that threatened rain but never cried. She wore her best clothes, a modest navy blouse and black slacks, ironed the night before while her son slept. Her shoes were worn, but clean. She tied her hair back and dabbed a bit of powder under her eyes to hide the sleepless night. With her bag full of documents and her heart pounding, she left her son at the neighbor's and walked to the courthouse as if heading into battle. She arrived early and waited alone in the hallway, watching lawyers breeze past in expensive suits, their shoes tapping against marble with purpose. When he arrived, he didn't even look at her. He walked in with his attorney, confident and freshly shaved, like this was just another meeting in his corporate schedule. She noticed the smirk on his face, the way he leaned back casually as if already certain of victory. But she wasn't here to beg. She wasn't here to cry. She was here for her son. And no matter how shaky her hands felt, her resolve had never been stronger. The courtroom buzzed quietly before the session began, the muffled shuffling of papers and muted conversations filling the space. When her name was called, she stood and walked to the front with her chin high, clutching the file that held her son's world. He sat confidently with his attorney, both in tailored suits, oozing smugness. As the judge opened the session, his lawyer leaned in and whispered something that made them both chuckle audibly. A few observers laughed too, as if they were watching a performance. The woman felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her expression still. When her ex's lawyer stood to speak, his words were sharp and polished, full of condescension wrapped in politeness. He painted her as unstable, accusing her of attempting to manipulate his client into fatherhood for financial gain. She has no career, no stability, no credibility, he declared, gesturing toward her with an almost theatrical wave. My client cannot be expected to shoulder the consequences of a situation clouded by uncertainty and lack of responsibility. A few people laughed again, quietly, but loud enough. The woman remained frozen, her hands tightening around her file until her knuckles turned white. Then came the statement that silenced even the laughter. Your Honor, she chose this life. She chose to be a single mother. There was no agreement, no consent to parenthood. She made the decision unilaterally, and now wants compensation for it. The attorney's voice echoed in the chamber, each word heavier than the last. The judge raised an eyebrow but did not interrupt. The woman's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to scream, to stand and shout about the truth, but she knew it wasn't time yet. Her ex never looked at her. He simply nodded as the attorney spoke, arms folded, eyes blank. When the judge asked if she had anything to present, she stood. Her voice shook but held firm as she began. I didn't choose abandonment. I didn't choose silence. I chose to raise a child that he helped create. And I chose to protect that child every day after he left. She opened her file, slowly pulling out one envelope at a time. And now I choose to be heard. Long before the pregnancy, there had been a moment she never spoke of, a business trip he had taken, extended by 3 days with no explanation. He returned distant, smelling like cologne that wasn't hers. She had asked gently, hoping for reassurance, but he dismissed her with irritation. You're imagining things. Stop being so insecure. She had doubted herself then, blamed her own anxieties. But deep down, something inside her had cracked. That was the first betrayal, quiet and invisible, the kind that poisons slowly. Later, she found hotel receipts hidden in a drawer, not for the city he claimed to have visited, but another one hours away. When she confronted him, he turned the accusation back on her, accusing her of invading his privacy and lacking trust. Somehow, she ended up apologizing. She convinced herself that mistakes happen and love means forgiveness. But she now understood that moment was the beginning of her silence, the start of a pattern that would leave her alone and fighting in court while he denied everything. In the back of the courtroom, seated alone on a wooden bench, was a woman with sharp eyes and a plain black dress. No one knew her name. She had entered quietly, unnoticed. But as the plaintiff spoke, pouring her soul into carefully chosen words, the woman leaned forward, watching intently. She was in her early 30s, with tired eyes and a notebook on her lap. She scribbled occasionally, but her eyes never left the scene unfolding before her. There was something about her presence, calm, unshaken, and deeply knowing. The plaintiff didn't see her. Not yet. But something about speaking felt different that day, as if someone understood. The silent witness remained still as the hearing continued, her face unreadable. Yet when the opposing lawyer made a snide comment under his breath, the woman's lips pressed together, and her hand paused mid-sentence in her notes. She had come for a reason, and her moment had not yet arrived, but it would. Taking the stand, her ex looked composed, even bored. I supported her financially during the pregnancy, he said smoothly, his voice like silk hiding a knife. I bought groceries, covered rent, gave her access to my accounts. She had everything she needed. He spoke with confidence, crafting the illusion of a generous man wronged by an ungrateful partner. His lawyer nodded approvingly, and some observers tilted their heads as if reconsidering their judgment. But the woman pulled out her folder again and removed a stack of receipts. This is the rent agreement, she said. It was in my name. This is my bank statement. Every deposit, every purchase, every time I covered both of our expenses. He never added a cent. He promised he would, but he never did. Her voice grew firmer. And this, she held up a small envelope, is the ultrasound bill I paid in cash while he claimed to be out of town again. The courtroom, for the first time, fell completely silent. The most painful moment wasn't when she was mocked, nor when he denied supporting her. It was when the judge asked if he had ever seen the child. He cleared his throat and said, "No, and I don't intend to. I never signed up to be a father." The words felt like glass across her skin. Her son, who bore his eyes in his laugh, was being discarded like a forgotten debt. No acknowledgement. No curiosity. Just rejection, wrapped in pride. The room grew heavy with tension, but he showed no remorse. She took out a photograph. It was her son's first birthday. A simple homemade cake, a single candle, and a boy with cake on his cheeks. She held it up. "He waited for a father who never came," she said softly. Her voice cracked, but her gaze remained locked on the judge. "He still asks if he has one. I say yes, because I won't let this man take even that away from him." The photo trembled in her hand, but her words were steel. The week before the hearing, she sat in her kitchen staring at a business card. It had been handed to her months earlier by a woman at a local resource center. "If you ever need legal help and can't afford it, call this number," the woman had said. But she hadn't called until that night when exhaustion pushed her past her pride. She dialed, expecting a machine. Instead, a calm voice answered. "Pro bono legal aid. How can I help?" She explained everything, her voice cracking under the weight of it all. The woman on the line listened quietly. At the end, there was only a pause, then a reply, "I know this case. I've been following it." That voice had been steady, familiar. She didn't know then, but the person on the other end was already preparing something. That call didn't just give her hope, it planted the first seed of a storm. She reached into her folder and took out a picture she had debated using at all. It was taken the day after her son was born, in the hospital room filled with quiet light. She was pale, exhausted, holding her newborn close to her chest. And standing next to her, smiling for the camera, was him. He had taken the photo himself, cradling them both in the frame, eyes soft, almost proud. She held it up and walked toward the bench. "This was the day he said we were a family," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Before the lies. Before the abandonment. Before the denial. This picture isn't proof of fatherhood. It's proof of his presence. His choice." The judge studied the image for a long moment. Her ex shifted uncomfortably, and his attorney whispered something, clearly unprepared for this quiet unraveling of their case. As the attorney for the defense packed his notes after a short recess, a yellow envelope slipped from his folder and hit the floor with a soft thud. The plaintiff, seated nearby, instinctively picked it up and froze. Her name was on it, along with the name of her son. Her eyes met the attorney's. He hesitated, then quickly snatched it back, but not before she had glimpsed the seal of a private investigator's firm on the corner. Back in her seat, her mind raced. She hadn't seen those documents, but she could guess. He had hired someone to investigate her. Perhaps to dig up anything that could discredit her. But what terrified her most wasn't the invasion, it was the fact that they had used her child's name to do it. Whatever strategy they had, it wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. She reached into her purse and retrieved a voice recorder. She had debated using it. Part of her wanted to win cleanly. But after seeing that envelope, she knew the other side had come prepared to destroy her. She pressed play. The room filled with the sound of her ex's voice, recorded during one of their final conversations. He laughed bitterly in the clip. "You really think I'll pay for a kid I don't even want? Take it to court. I'll win. I always do. Gasps echoed from the benches behind her. The attorney for the defense stood in protest, but the judge raised a hand. "Let it finish," she said firmly. The clip continued. "You're on your own, like always. Don't think crying in front of a judge will change that." Then silence. The woman turned off the recorder and looked at the bench. "I didn't come here to cry," she said. "I came to protect my child from the damage pride can do." Just as the silence after the recording settled into an uneasy tension, a voice echoed from the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, may I speak?" All eyes turned to the woman in black who had been silently observing. She stood, holding her notebook to her chest, her voice calm but resolute. The judge hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised by the request. "Please state your name and relationship to the case," she asked. The woman walked forward slowly, her heels clicking softly on the tile. "My name is Adrian Holt. I was once in a relationship with the defendant, and I have relevant testimony regarding his conduct." The judge allowed her to proceed, and the room collectively leaned in. Adrian spoke clearly, recounting her own experience. She described how he had emotionally manipulated her, abandoned their shared apartment, and later denied responsibility when she became pregnant. "I miscarried before I could seek support," she said quietly. "But I saw this woman today, and I knew I had to come forward." He follows a pattern. He walks away, denies, and destroys. Her voice didn't waver. For the first time since the hearing began, the defendant's confidence cracked. He looked down, jaw tight, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Adrian continued, detailing how she had also received threats when she asked for help after their breakup. "He told me no one would believe me. That I had nothing. That I was nothing," she said, her eyes now locked on him. The courtroom remained still, every word slicing through the illusion he had carefully built. The judge listened with focused attention, occasionally jotting down notes. The defendant's lawyer tried to interject, objecting on the grounds of relevance, but the judge overruled him. "This testimony speaks directly to character and intent," she stated. Then Adrian took a breath and looked at the woman who had fought alone for so long. "You're not alone anymore," she said gently. "I thought I was the only one, but I see now that his cruelty is not new. It's a pattern." The plaintiff's eyes welled with tears, not of weakness, but of relief. For the first time in years, someone else had spoken her pain aloud. She wasn't invisible. And now, his truth, his real truth, was no longer buried behind charm. The courtroom reconvened after a recess, and the judge addressed the defendant directly. "There is a discrepancy in your declared income," she said firmly. "Your statements to the court do not match tax records obtained by our clerk." The defendant shifted in his seat. "My income varies. I do consulting work," he replied vaguely. But the judge pressed further. A series of financial documents had surfaced, anonymous donations to a private account linked to a shell company, all pointing back to him. It was clear he had moved money to appear broke. The plaintiff's eyes widened as the truth unfolded. He hadn't just walked away, he had built a web of deceit to ensure she got nothing. He had lived comfortably while she had rationed diapers and skipped meals. The judge's voice grew colder. "Not only did you abandon your child, but you attempted to manipulate this court with falsehoods. That will not go unpunished." The smirk that had once lingered on his face had completely vanished. The plaintiff reached into her folder one last time, hesitating before pulling out a folded paper. "This wasn't meant to be shown," she said quietly. But maybe it's the clearest picture of what's been lost. She unfolded a crayon drawing, a simple image of a boy, a mother, and a space beside them labeled Dad, with a question mark drawn in bright blue. It was her son's attempt to make sense of absence. A drawing full of innocence and confusion. She handed it to the judge without another word. The judge looked at the image, her fingers lightly trembling as she studied the colors, the unspoken ache of a child searching for someone who chose to vanish. "Children understand more than we give them credit for," the judge murmured. The courtroom was silent again, but not from tension. This time it was reverence. The truth had spoken not just through law or testimony, but through the hands of a child longing for answers. After the session paused for deliberation, the plaintiff sat alone on a bench in the hallway, her fingers brushing against a folded letter tucked deep in her bag. It was written years ago by her father, before he passed. A man of quiet strength, he had always told her, "Stand up, even when no one claps." She unfolded the letter and read it silently. "People will doubt you, shame you, mock you. But they cannot erase your truth. And truth, one day, always finds light." She closed her eyes, breathing deeply as those words settled inside her like armor. Her father hadn't known what she would face, but somehow, he had prepared her. She hadn't just come to court to fight for child support. She had come to reclaim her dignity. To protect a child's right to love, safety, and truth. The judge's words would come soon, but in her heart, she already knew she had done what was right. And her father, wherever he was, would have been proud. When the judge returned to the bench, her expression had changed. Her usual composed, neutral demeanor had softened. She held the child's drawing in one hand, the folder of evidence in the other. Her voice was steady, but something in it cracked ever so slightly. "This court does not take emotional influence lightly," she began, "but what has been presented here is not manipulation, it is humanity." Her eyes shifted to the defendant, now visibly tense, sweat beading at his temple. "What we have seen today is not just legal failure, it is moral negligence." Then, she paused and looked down at the drawing again. A child has been denied the most basic truth of his existence, not because it was uncertain, but because it was inconvenient to a man too proud to accept responsibility. Her voice trembled ever so slightly, and she wiped a tear discreetly from the corner of her eye. The courtroom held its breath. For the first time, it felt like justice had a beating heart. The judge invited the plaintiff to make a closing statement. She stood slowly, eyes scanning the room one last time. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of everything she had endured. "I didn't come here to punish him. I came because my son deserves to know that he matters. That his life is not a mistake. That someone fought for him even when it was hard." Her words, simple and raw, struck deeper than any legal argument could. She turned slightly, not toward her ex, but toward the gallery. "There are many women like me who are too afraid to speak. They're told to move on, to not cause trouble. But silence only helps those who walk away. So I speak, for my son, and for the mothers who were left behind, unheard." She sat down, not in defeat, but in quiet triumph. She had said everything she needed to say. There was nothing left to fear. The judge adjusted her glasses and delivered the ruling with clarity and firmness. The court recognizes the child as the legal and biological son of the defendant. Full paternity is confirmed, and financial support is not only warranted, it is owed. There was a pause as the gallery stirred. In addition, the court orders retroactive payment of child support for the last 2 years, with penalties for attempted concealment of income. Gasps rippled through the room. But the ruling didn't stop there. Furthermore, the judge continued, due to the emotional harm caused in the defendant's deliberate evasion of legal and ethical responsibility, this court imposes a formal reprimand on his public record. Actions have consequences, not just for money, but for the example we set for the next generation. The defendant sat frozen. His empire of arrogance had crumbled. And everyone saw it happen. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile when the verdict was read. As people whispered and murmured around her, she stood quietly, collected her bag, and exited the courtroom with the same dignity she had brought in. Outside, the air felt lighter. The sky, still gray, no longer pressed down on her shoulders. She took a deep breath, looked up, and exhaled, slowly, as if letting go of everything that no longer belonged to her. A young reporter rushed toward her, microphone ready. "Miss, do you have a statement?" She turned slightly, considered her words, then replied, "This isn't a story. It's someone's life." With that, she walked away, her heels clicking softly on the courthouse steps. No fanfare. No applause. Just a woman who had finally reclaimed her voice, holding the hand of a child who would grow up knowing that truth had been louder than silence. Months passed. Life didn't become easier overnight, but it became clearer. With the support now mandated, she reduced her working hours and enrolled in evening classes. She could finally be present for her son, watching him grow without the constant cloud of fear. They laughed more. They rested more. He began to smile without needing a reason. One afternoon, as they walked home from the park, he looked up and asked, "Mommy, are we okay now?" She nodded, eyes misty. "Yes, baby. We're more than okay." She joined a support group for single mothers, sharing her journey with those still too scared to speak. She never named him, never sought revenge. That wasn't her purpose. Her victory wasn't in his downfall, it was in her rise. In showing her son that love means presence, that truth matters, and that dignity is not given, it's claimed. She had walked through fire, not to burn the past, but to light a way forward, for both of them.